Welcome to the acclaimed podcast, The Deep Dive, featuring your esteemed hosts, Andy Monitor and Drew Dinzik, powered by BetSperts.
Welcome to The Deep Dive. This is one of my funner genres of deep dive. One where we learn about something cool that's adjacent to the stuff we care about, but we don't have to kind of be the experts. We can kind of ask the key questions that we think will kind of, number one, help us understand something interesting that is continuing to grow. And number two, figure out where to find it, how to find an edge in something that is, is becoming a more obvious, pot of money in this space to try to attack. And that, of course, is best ball fantasy football. I need to pivot a little bit to NFL in general. We're getting to that time of season where we're going to have to start previewing things in general. So it's time to start thinking about football with hockey and basketball in the books. Wimbledon already pear-shaped on me. NBA draft thoughts, of course, you can catch our spaces tomorrow or check out the article that Ben Fox wrote from VSiN for some of that draft thoughts. But we get to talk about football today. And to join us and to help us understand better, none other than TJ Hernandez of 4 for 4 to help us kind of flesh out the best ball space. And our friends over at PFF Forecast, they tell me on and on and on, you have to draft in June if you want to win best ball. And so here we are at the end of June. Days. I got 4 days to figure this out. So without further ado, first ever time, welcome to the Deep Dive. Mr. TJ Hernandez, how are you doing tonight?
Boys, thanks for having me. I'm doing great. Nice talking to some BetSperts family. We're also so damn busy doing our own thing. I never get to talk to you guys. So I'm excited to be here.
It's nice to reach out to a guest just in the work Slack.
Yeah,
hey,
makes it way easier.
What are we doing next Monday? Let's talk. And it is cool. And truthfully, we wanted to do something like this last year, and it's just like, man, I don't know who to talk to. This was very convenient because you guys over there, you have the rankings. Paulson does some stuff with it. You have tools, and like you're doing a bunch of best ball content too. And I ended up doing a best ball draft last year. I only did one, so I didn't win. I didn't win the million. I tried.
You didn't do it in June. Yeah.
I didn't do it in June.
I did a couple more than one last year, and I still didn't win a million. So don't feel so bad.
Okay.
I went with the Charlie Buckets theory.
Yeah,
all those kids are opening all those chocolate bars. I figured I'll just open like one or two.
Get that one.
It did not work out. But and we'll get to that later too, because I wonder on your opinion on the difference between some of these people that are just pounding into these and how somebody who doesn't want to spend a shitload of money on this can go. I did have to open up a new account. Luis was able, with the partnership with Underdog, he had to send my information over there, and my original Underdog account, I couldn't change my username. It was the classic Drew,
Donghammer 69, yeah.
Donghammer 69. He's like, come on. So
come on, man.
I have 2 Underdog accounts, so I can't.
Yeah, we have a separate work Slack for the Donghanger accounts.
I love it, man. So TJ, help me before we kind of get into the specifics of best ball.
Yeah.
As someone who is integral in the content space for fantasy football, where does best ball sort of fit in the arc of like the heavy duty fantasy players, like the guys who are making their living doing this? Like, is this now like all of a sudden like the most important thing that you're doing in June and July is trying to nail these best ball drafts? And how does it fit with all the other stuff that you're doing over the calendar year fantasy football wise?
Yeah, in the scope of the whole fantasy football universe, it's still very niche. Like, there's still, if you ask the average dude on the street about best ball, he's still never heard of it.
Sure.
But when it comes to people that are into DFS, fantasy sports, specifically fantasy football full time, people are just going to follow the money, right? So I think right now, I would say over the last 2 years, my off season from the NFL draft until DFS starts has been primarily best ball. It's an interesting thing to think about from a professional gambler standpoint, because if you're chasing after something like Best Ball Mania Underdog Tournament, one, you're just, everybody is a huge dog, right? It's kind of like the World Series of Poker. Like you just have a couple more lottery tickets than the other guy if you're good, and there's just a bunch of dead money, and you're also just tying up your money for so damn long in best ball, right? That's another big problem with it. If you're somebody that's like trying to max out these tournaments, depending on the size of your bankroll, there are a lot of people that can't afford to have 10 grand tied up for 8 months, which is, that makes a lot of sense. So I think it's kind of personal preference. I mean, as far as how much digital ink is going to it this year with the Best Ball Mania tournament having a $10 million prize pool, that is where almost all my attention has been this offseason. Is it the most positive EV thing to do to only be focusing on tournaments? Probably not. But what are we doing here for not chasing $2 million? Okay.
Yeah, Andy. So this is like the circa pick'em then, basically.
Yeah. It makes me think of that too, where it's like, hey, I'm already going to be betting football all year. Mm-hmm. Why not take a portion of my bankroll, put it on a pick'em, put it on Survivor, do something like that, just to kind of diversify, and also it keeps your. I don't know, Drew. Does this ever happen to you when you're looking at circa pick'em stuff? Like, it helps with my process for the week, just betting football too. And sure. I think this is, obviously, and if you play in the super flex one that's up now, that's going to be way different than a lot of, a lot of these are going to be different than anything you're doing if you're in dynasty leagues, if you're in super, two quarterback, but just in general, like, I know a lot of guys who prep for redraft by doing mock drafts. Yeah. And I can't wrap my head around, like, first of all, I'm just not in enough redrafts, but it just feels like dead time. I get that it's good reps and you get a feel for where people are, but you get a feel for where people are with ADP. Yeah, for sure. And this feels like a way better use of my time if I want to just knock out a bunch of $5 super flexes to get a kind of a feel for where people are going than doing mock drafts. And again, I'm only in like 2 redraft leagues at all, but it's I need to prep somehow. I don't buy the magazines anymore.
Yeah, I think probably for if you're the average redraft player that plays in 2 or 3 leagues, or even maybe 1 big buy-in league a year, at the very least, if you're drafting best ball, there we'll probably get into the nuances of the differences, but you're at least getting that muscle memory and kind of learning where players are going, what players you like, how you can build a team, like the flow of the draft, where you can get certain guys if you want running back early, wide receiver early, whatever it might be. I just think that muscle memory is the most important. I mean, I've gone from classic the 20 redraft leagues to now that it's my full-time job and I'm so focused on DFS and best ball. Like, I play in 2 redraft leagues a year, but when I get to that home league draft and I've done 100 drafts and everyone else is their first time all year, I mean, you can almost go in there without a ranking sheet and do it blind, just because you're so comfortable with not just the ADP, the values, the players that you're going to like, but what that means for your team as a whole, right? When you start, say, running back, wide receiver, you have a really good idea of how that team is going to shape up. Where I think people that just haven't put the time in to do enough drafts, they're still going to panic and put together some probably pretty poor teams, at least in terms of things like roster construction. So yeah, being in, even if it's only a $1, you don't have to be doing these tournaments. There's $1 12-man best ball leagues, whether it's on Underdog, whether it's a super flex, whether it's tight end premium on something like FFPC. Like, you could find a very cheap best ball league where you can throw $10 in, do 10 $1 leagues, and you're going to be way ahead of your league mates, I think.
Does DraftKings still have best ball too? I know.
Yeah, DraftKings. Yep,
so yeah, you can do this a lot of places.
Yeah.
And it's funny too. Before you came into the room, Drew and I were in there early talking, and I mentioned, like, my home league, how horrible I am at waivers. I'm like, this is like custom fit for my level of
attention during the season.
Yeah, man.
Attention. Well, so much more is going on with betting. Like, I don't give a shit about waivers on a Tuesday night. And like I said, I'm in 2 leagues, and I still struggle. And also, Drew, this is for people who maybe bet on the NBA draft and then realize, like, there's no hockey, there's no basketball, and they don't handicap baseball, and they're struggling with life they feel like they should play some bets today, and they maybe have a bankroll that's a little extra flush thanks to Duke University's Paulo Banchero. maybe this would be a good way to scratch that itch. Like, I might be doing 3 of these a day just to keep me from betting baseball totals.
I like the general concept that TJ brought up of muscle memory and just kind of forcing yourself to think through roster construction, forcing yourself to think through decisions like Cooper Kupp or CeeDee Lamb at this spot, right? Like, forcing yourself to kind of at least evaluate players whose rankings and whose average draft position are very close and they fill the same role, and forcing yourself to take a position on those kind of now before it's you get to later in the season, I think makes total sense if you're a very serious fantasy football player. And then the kind of I was kind of tongue in cheek with our friends from PFF about the must draft in June, but is it fair to say that basically, because of the level of seriousness of players like yourself and others who are doing this at a professional level, or at least a high stakes level, that like the ADP that we go through from best ball drafts from June and through July is kind of like price discovery, more or less, for these markets? And like by the time we get to the end of it, it is what it is. These are the right rankings after the end of this process.
I think first of all, I think it kind of depends what we're talking about. Like I said, if you're playing the Best Ball Mania 3 tournament where there's 450,000 people and we all just have a lottery ticket, even if you draft 150 teams, you're going to want to spread out your action. You're still a massive underdog to even cash in the tournament. But I mean, there are just which we call cash game leagues, just single 12-man teams where it doesn't necessarily matter if you're drafting in May or August. But to answer your question about this big money that everybody's chasing, we have looked over some data, and the differences the margins are pretty small. Like, there isn't anything overwhelming, but the highest scores and the best advance rates, however you want to look at it, have typically come in May. Usually the tournaments have launched right after the NFL draft, and then in August. So I think the explanation for that is probably, and the reason we don't know for sure, my guess would be May after the NFL draft is when obviously we don't have prices on players yet. So we get the chance to really, really exploit these things. And then after, say, by the end of May, after we have 3 or 4 weeks of drafting, the prices kind of settle to where they probably should be, because the people that are drafting in May are probably the most hardcore guys, going to trend towards the sharper guys. From June 1st until I think training camp starts July 26th this year, there just isn't a lot of stuff happening. So there's not going to be, once those ADPs kind of settle in the summer, they're not going to move a ton. There'll be news things here and there, injuries, legal cases, whatever have you, but just not overwhelming amounts of news. Whereas once we get those training camps, once we get to August, now we start seeing real player movement, a new chance to take advantage. And no matter how sharp you are, like, it's the same in betting, right? The more information you have, the better. Even if other people have that information, you're probably going to be maximizing your bets with the most information. We have that in August, and then you're just going to have more casual players in August. The field's just going to get softer, so you're going to get worse people in your draft. So that's a really long way of saying May and August seem to be optimal, but you still want some exposure in June and July. The winner of the $1 million tournament last year was drafted in June. So there's still going to be spots to take advantage of different swings and prices, and maybe you get a guy for whatever reason. Right now, if you get him in the 15th round, training camp comes, there's an injury, now he's a 3rd round pick. That's just Skolansky bucks, to use a poker term.
Yeah, and back to the muscle memory thing too. That really resonates because, I mean, even Drew, do you remember when we screwed up way early in this podcast, and you called me or texted me and said, "Hey, I wasn't actually recording that episode."
Oh, sure.
And we just sat down and said, "Fuck it, let's redo it." And it was, and at the end of that, we're like, "Holy shit, that was good," because we had done it already. Yeah. And even me, and I misspoke. I'm in 3 leagues if I count my tennis or get the fuck out league. So my home league is my 3rd league. Traditionally, we as men of some distinction ruin Labor Day weekend by having it on that Sunday. Like, people have had to quit the league in the past because they said we're not having Labor Day weekend run by a fantasy draft where you go back home and drink for 3 days straight. It's such is life. But that it is always my last one. And I mean, even doing 2 other shorter small drafts maybe, again, with some smarter people, but not fantasy experts by any means, it does give you kind of a feel for, like my first one, like you said, people who don't do it maybe construct a shitty roster. And I feel like it's like mixing up two puzzles and trying to put it all together, where it's like I get to the end of the draft or maybe even partway through, I'm like, you screwed up in redraft. Like I misused my first 4 picks, and now I'm going to be chasing it. Like, you already know you've done it wrong.
Yep.
And I think by the second one, I have a little better idea based on which spot I have, and I can do a little better. And then on that third one, I know, like, hey, I'm in the 6th spot. This is what I'm going to do with that, and I kind of know what those people in the middle of the round have done. And I always do really good in that draft, so I'm kind of excited to see what happens when I do 100 of those.
Well, let's get to the mechanics of this, actually, because that's a good segue. How many do you do? How does this work? I bet I want to win this $2 million, man. That's a nice little payday for playing some fantasy football. What are the mechanics of this process?
Because you are tying your money up for so long, and you are chasing like these big paydays in these huge fields. I kind of looked at, like, if I have my DFS and gambling and now this year Formula One bankroll, I kind of think of this outside of it. This is kind of like funny money. I'm not expecting to get like a nice ROI on best ball. Like, I'm probably going to end up maxing the best ball mania, and then I'll play some other like regular leagues. I'll just have some action on FFPC. Yahoo Best Ball is like crazy soft, so I've just been, the last couple of years, I've always thrown, I don't know, maybe $1,000 at Yahoo leagues, just because the ROI out there is insane. But the calculus has kind of changed this year with the $10 million tournament. I'm just kind of chalking this one up to I don't know, like a vacation money, but turned into my casual time for fantasy sports. But if you're thinking about playing it as a long-term investment, as part of your whatever you break it up, your annual gambling bankroll, I think you should be focusing a lot more on softer sites, 12-man leagues. Like, there are some smaller tournaments that you might have a better shot at. But if you're just firing off at this at Best Ball Mania 3, unless you have whatever you're comfortable with, you're firing off $3,500 some odd dollars if you're max entering this thing. A lot of people aren't going to be comfortable tying that money up for half the year. So it's just a personal preference risk thing, I think.
I like how you said, I think we all do that a little too, where we separate out our bankrolls. And it's the same, like, Drew, you spoke to, circa Survivor and circa, Pick'em. It's not like I say, oh, my bankroll is $2,000 less because I entered each one of these. It's like, no, that was, right. I planned ahead. Like, I was going to enter those. I still have, like, that was money I'd set aside for that. I think this is kind of the same. And fantasy, redraft fantasy, I spend a little bit on that. Like, that's all just kind of separate stuff. Yeah. Because this is tied up for a long time.
Yeah.
It has it's probably dead wood with a super high upside if you just if you luck out or do enough coverage and end up with one of your 150 teams. I'm cheering for you now.
Well, no,
I want some. I'm cheering. To be fair, I'm cheering for me, but secondarily, I'll cheer for you, either one of you to take down the BBM.
To give an actual quantitative answer, if you're thinking about this as how you're going to fit it into your bankroll and you do want to be very disciplined, I think you can approach it like you would DFS qualifiers. Like, if you're spending more than 1% of your bankroll on this, you're probably you probably need to rethink things.
Surely.
So I think I think realistically, if you're looking at your entire betting fantasy, bankroll, and you can't replenish it, if you don't have comfortably 6 digits for your annual bankroll, I don't think you should be throwing $3,500 at this thing as part of your bankroll. If you have $3,500, income that you're just using it as fun money, by all means. But if you're really thinking about it, I think you should think about it like qualifiers. It should be like less than 1%.
So I like how you said vacation money. Yeah. I'm not a part of this with you two, but I'm of the opinion people in Southern California shouldn't take vacations.
Oh man.
What's the point?
Well, $3,500 doesn't pay for my vacation. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
It doesn't even pay for the antibiotics anyway.
I'll pay for the flight. So real quick, so again, mechanics wise, you're allowed 150 entries.
Yep.
Into the
big one. Yep.
And they're $25 a pop, so we're just under 4K outlay.
Yep.
And then realistically, if you are going to put 150 entries into this, are you spreading them out over time so that you are capturing some before,
definitely,
some early in the process, some in the middle, and then some in the late, and you have kind of a different strategy depending on when you're drafting? Is that reasonable?
I wouldn't say my strategy necessarily changes. I think you're just going to naturally have some ebb and flows throughout the offseason. I started in May. I think I'm 35 in right now. My goal is to be to like 70 by August and just fire one or two a day for August to the first week of kickoff. But I wouldn't say my strategy is necessarily changing. I mean, you could really get into the nuances here, but I would just say what I'm really paying attention to throughout the off season, I would say probably after the once training camp starts, I'm really paying attention to my exposure. So making sure I have players that I want to be overexposed to, underexposed to, and then roster construction exposures, which we could start talking about, but just how I'm building each team, how I'm stacking each team, what offenses I'm exposed to. So, I mean, my draft strategy isn't necessarily going to change. I want to be scooping up as much value as possible all year. I want to be adhering to the roster construction guidelines and stacking guidelines that we think are optimal, and then just making sure that portfolio looks all right, at least in my opinion, come September.
When naturally things are going to change just based on news. A player gets traded, a player gets hurt. Just your rankings are going to change.
Yeah.
And, it's probably not enough to change full strategy unless you had.
Well, no, I mean, this is what I mean.
Like
if you sit down in August and you're like, I'm going to
fire
fire two. If you sit down in August and you're like, I'm going to fire two today, or you're like, okay, I'm going to make one high risk, and then I'm going to make one kind of round out the portfolio. And then the next day you're like, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that.
I think we need to get into builds.
Yeah. We can go either way you guys want. You tell me.
Well, no, I think that's where you're talking. I mean, as far as once you start doing different styles of builds, don't give away all the secrets.
No, I mean the secrets are available in the Best Ball Mania Bible, available on 4for4.com. But if I think I'm not going into any single draft thinking this is going to be a high risk build, this is going to be a low risk build. Like I want to be very fluid every time I enter a draft, and that goes back to the point of muscle memory, right? When you get to when you've done 30, 40, 50 of these things, you can know very quickly how that team is going to shape up. I think more so what I'm thinking about is if I get to August and I only have, say, I don't know, like 15% of Josh Allen, and I want to be around 25 to 30% of Josh Allen, and I know I only have, say, 15, 16 drafts left for the year, I'm going to, instead of waiting to take Josh Allen when he falls past ADP, I'm going to be more likely to take him at ADP. So those are really the things I'm thinking about. If I say one thing that's like, let's just do the most controversial build, like zero running back team. If I want to be at 10% zero running back teams, right now I'm not going to go into a draft and say, this is going to be a zero running back team. But when it gets to but when I get to August and I realize, I only have 4% zero running back teams, now I'll go into the draft and I'll fire off a couple zero running backs, go out of my way to do that.
That makes sense.
I like the thought of being fluid, and again, this is coming from an asshole who does 3 drafts a year, 4 last year.
Not this year. You're doing 100.
Yeah, I did 1 best ball, but my 3 redrafts. But you do got to stay fluid, especially when I'm in, again, home leagues where you have some unpredictability based on, some guys might get weird with it. You just got to be ready to be like, I like how you said, you don't want to have a rigidity to what you're going to do with that one play. It's more of maybe a bit of rigidity to the overall portfolio, like knowing, hey, I need more exposure to this guy. If there's some coin flips down hey, I can take either of these guys in this spot or either of these guys in this upcoming spot. I need a little more exposure to, whoever.
And that's going to be the difference between somebody like me that's going to be drafting 150 in Best Ball Mania and somebody that might draft only 2 or 3, or someone that's only using this to get ready for their home league. Like, if you're only drafting 2 or 3, or if you're just getting ready for your home league, like you're going to take some bigger stands than me just by nature, because again, let's just use Josh Allen as an example. If you think you need Josh Allen to win this tournament and you're only playing 2 leagues, take Josh Allen 6 picks ahead of ADP because that's the build you're looking for. For me, I'm doing so many drafts, I'm naturally going to get my Josh Allen exposure, right? So, like, I think you're probably within a single draft, the guy that's only doing 2 or 3 should be taking more stands because he has less bullets and he needs to beat 450,000 people. So, you take your stands, and I am doing that when I get later in the season. But for now, it's all about gobbling up that ADP and just kind of smashing the tournament that way.
Okay, so in a completely neutral setting, you sit down for a best ball draft and you are literally like, I'm going to get as many players as I can who are higher than their current ADP as possible.
Yeah, I think especially early in like the first, let's say like first 4 or 5 rounds of a best ball draft, I'm so comfortable with what I want to do with roster construction and stacking that if I could get through my first 5 rounds and gobble up ADP values, guys that are falling past their ADP, I'm going to be really comfortable building around my team that way, even if it's not necessarily players that I like. Now, again, I'm going to take stands on guys, but I'm not going to go out of my way to take a guy a full round ahead of ADP in the 4th round. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Okay. So
I was going to ask that. What's more important if you're looking at it and you got the 2 button guy meme and it's a huge ADP value, or here's a guy who's pretty close, but I have him ranked much higher than the market in general. I suppose it's just a little of both.
There's some pretty convincing data that through the first, I don't know, call it 8 or 9 rounds of the draft, if you're reaching like a full round past ADP just because you love a guy, it's been pretty detrimental to whether it's advance rates or total points. You're just losing so much value in your draft by doing that. When you get to your 14th, 15th round, by all means, the difference between reaching for a round in the 15th round and reaching around in the 6th round is really different, right?
Sure.
So I think early in drafts, if you're doing that, it doesn't make sense, because if you have a guy ranked 30th, but he's going 45th overall, he's still going to be available if you at 45th most of the time, right? So you're still going to get your 30th ranked guy. So why not get a guy that's going 30th and a guy that's going 45th? You have them both ranked 30th and 31st, whatever it is. So, I would say in general, reaching early in the draft is shown to be pretty bad for results.
I suppose just game theory wise too, just somebody for that guy who you might reach for to not be there at his ADP. Yeah, there has to be one of 11 other guys has to really like him as well and be willing to reach. So exactly, I get what you're saying. Like further down, there's a much smaller difference between 100 and 120 compared to even like 25 and 30.
Yeah, and we're really, really bad at projecting fantasy football players over the course of a whole season. Like, even the best prognosticators have, like, depending on how you want to measure it, like a 60 or 65% hit rate on guys. So that's kind of building in our own our own errors and taking account the volatility of an NFL season, right? Like, sure, we might be ranking these guys higher than their ADP, but that just means they're going to be our favorite targets at their ADP. If we're not letting ourselves let the market make errors, we're kind of losing that edge we have in the small margins of whatever projection we think is better than the field. So we're building that error into our projections by letting ourselves take values, even if it is players we don't like, right? Like, we're wrong a lot. So if that player falls 12 spots by ADP, even if you don't love him, that's when you want to scoop him up. That's the value in any fantasy football draft.
Okay. So in your opinion, this year, the draft is won in what round? Or what range?
Oh, that's a really good question. I am going to say the best ball mania tournament is going to be won in the first 3 or 4 rounds. I think one thing, and this is only, and this is kind of just a long way to like talk about a roster construction that I love. But one thing that happened last year is early round tight end did not dominate in best ball, and for the vast majority, best balls I think I've been playing since 2013. One of the most dominant strategies has been early round tight end. I think people that go out of their way this year to load up on early round tight ends are going to have a really big advantage on the field. It just gives you so much flexibility in your roster construction. It has it's if your early round tight end hits, it's one of the biggest positional advantages you could find. And there just isn't another position where or that early in the draft, you're going to see such a high win rate or advance rate from position because there's so many running backs, so many wide receivers, so many quarterbacks that can dominate where tight ends, when those early round tight ends hit, they just absolutely smash. We've seen it going back to Gronk. We've seen it from Kelsey. We've seen it from Kittle a couple years ago. Last year, there just wasn't a dominant early round tight end. So that's the only reason I say, like, I think in those first few rounds, having the way I've thought about it and talked about it is there's 4 or 5 early round tight ends, so about 35% of the field is naturally going to have an early round tight end. I want like half of my teams to have an early round tight end.
Part of the exposure and this is the most interesting thing I talked to with former guest Link Calhoun about golf, DFS when I get to talk. Yeah. The thing is, I have to plan to like stay up till 2 a.m. to do that because that's when he works. But talking about ownership percentages, trying to get the right mix of that in when we're building our golf DFS. And I wonder about that. That's obviously the most interesting thing, picking his brain about it. But as far as, and let's assume it's a guy like you who is going to max a tournament, whether it's the big balls, the best.
That sounds like a good one.
The BBM. I'm just going to call it the BBM. I can't remember the name, but or
Ball Mania.
Best Ball Mania, even if you're just maxing the $5 Superflex. Yeah. Let's assume you have 150 lineups, 150 teams. What's a high percentage of ownership? Does it vary by positional group or position? Is it like, this is high for running back, but it's not high for tight end because there's only like 4 good tight ends.
Yeah, the weird thing about Best Ball compared to DFS is most of the field is going to be at least in 100% of leagues, right? Everyone that's getting drafted is going to get drafted in most leagues. So there's a couple ways you can think about it. One is your exposure to a single player. I think the high end of maybe like an early round pick, I'll have on upwards of 40% of my rosters. That's like really, really overweight on a player. If you have that, I'd say the first, 6 or 7 rounds, if you have a guy in 40% of your rosters, that's crazy high. In the late rounds, it gets way more mixed up, right? Because you can if you have a guy you love in the 16th round, you could get him in the 16th round 100% of drafts if you want. So I would say somewhere those guys might end up on maybe 50% of my rosters. Now, the one way you can get unique, and this is like super meta qualifier thinking, just trying to get way outside the box. In those last rounds, that is where you get. I think Hayden Winks of Underdog did a study on this, and I think when you get to the 15th round is when players stop being drafted in 100% of drafts. So when you get to those last rounds in a tournament of this size, don't do this in a 12-man league, but in a tournament of this size, you can start reaching for these guys that are really deep on the depth chart that aren't being drafted on. Yeah. Exactly. One of my guys has been Quez Watkins because I love the Eagles this year. So, like, he's not being – his ADP is 215.9. There's 216 guys drafted in every league. So if he ends up on 20% of my teams and he only ends up on 35% of rosters and I get lucky enough to make it to the final round, there's a good chance I'm the only guy out of 460 guys in week 17 with a Quez Watkins stack, right? Like, so those last couple rounds, that's when you could start taking stands. And the way I've thought about this has basically just come down to stacking. If I could find guys deep on roster that complete team or game stacks, that's kind of how I've been thinking about looking for these unique guys.
A stack goes both ways though, right? Like, you can stack a guy who you like who gets a lion's share of the targets when some other player on that team is assumed to get those and doesn't. Like, that would be like an Elijah Mitchell situation. Like, people probably were all over them, Trey Sermon last year.
Yeah.
Guy was useless. Elijah Mitchell was, stole the freaking job from him. I think, I don't know who possibly was out on a limb for Elijah Mitchell, but I imagine that's kind of an example.
It's probably the kind of range you need. And the other way, I suppose you could take a stand and correct me if this is stupid, but 0% of somebody, somebody, sure. Just like a bunch of, a bunch of guys near the top where it's just like, you know what, this guy he's a top 3 round guy, and I'm going to have 0%. I don't think he's going to meet his expectations. It's like he's an injury risk or whatever you want to say.
It's like DFS. If you try to cover all your bases, you're just losing upside, right? Like if you're thinking that way, that's just a horrible way to be playing any type of big tournament.
Okay, so here's a question. Someone went into last year's process, decided I'm going to get overweight on Jonathan Taylor. That would have been very possible because he was going in round 1, but it was at the end of round 1. So you would have had a lot of chances to load up on him at pick 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever. Similarly, you could have been like, I'm going to get overweight on Cooper Kupp. Like, those players, like people who happen to take a stand on guys who ended up having outsized performance were ultimately at the end of the day, the ones that were in the cash.
Yeah. And that's why I think why doing a lot of drafts early is helpful, because you can start getting an idea of these guys you like, or you can just subscribe to a site like 4-4 and take our guys the most. But if you don't take a stand, you're gonna minimize your opportunity to run pure when you are right. Correct? Okay. Like if you're trying to have even exposure to every single player, like you're just losing out on chances to have these just outsized wins when you're correct. Again, it's the same as DFS. Like you're not, if you trust that whatever your 10% owned guy is going to go off that week and you have 40% of them, you're going to crush. But if you don't take those stands, you're just never giving yourself an opportunity to realize that upside. So yes, to answer your question, I'm all into there's going to be guys you fade just as much as guys you're overweight on. I mean, one of those guys right now for me is Devontae Adams. I'm not taking it unless he's falling into late second or mid second round. He just doesn't make sense as a first round pick to me.
Love that.
I'd rather finish at the bottom than in the middle.
100%, because
there's no money in the middle.
And if this was a tournament where you 5x your money every time you min cash, by all means, take this middling approach. You can have a really good ROI. And if you are playing only 12-man leagues and no tournaments, like you could probably have a nice 30-40% ROI on the year by playing it a little bit safer. In something like this where 40% of the prize pool is going to 4 people out of 450,000, like min cashing doesn't do you anything. You're still going to lose money. So if you're not taking those stands, you just like stop playing tournaments of this. Don't play tournaments of this size if you're not comfortable doing that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Quick, specific question. If you are coming in with I guess I want to talk about builds a little bit more. What in the hell is a 0 running back strategy, and why are people doing this?
All right. Let's back up and understand
it was prevalent in redraft. I mean, it kind of started with that. Is it based off the redraft strategy where you just punted on it and found some cheap stuff late?
The draft, the premise for how you draft is yes. The big difference in redraft is obviously you have trades, waiver wire, which is a huge, deal in 0 running back, and a lot of the 0 running back writings were heavily based around PPR scoring, because a lot of the ways people were being successful, going back to Sean Siegel, who kind of made it popular, was scooping up these pass catching third down type running backs. In something like best ball, especially in a big tournament like this, you need to run absolutely pure, right? Like you just need to run perfectly. So the concept is simple. You're going to have the strongest team at every other position, hopefully, if you're drafting correctly, and hopefully win the war of attrition by loading up on back-end running back guys. If 1 or 2 hit, you're probably going to be one of the only people with that combination when the rest of the league is drafting early round running backs. Now, you need a year that is going to be absolutely chaotic. You're going to need, obviously, draft a couple of the right guy, like Rashad Penny was a really good example last year. And the benefit of it is that the zero running backs in a tournament of this size, the zero running back strategy is only going to get stronger as the year goes on, which is where the most money is made, right? So if your team is peaking, if you do enough through your other positions to make it through that first round, make it to the playoffs, when your team is peaking, it's when the most money is being made, and it's giving you like the most unique combinations of players, just because there just aren't like so this is the thing people get where people really mess up with something like zero RB, because it does get it's the most controversial, it gets the most ink, people love arguing about it. Over the last 2 years, less than 4% of the Best Ball Mania fields use zero running back, right? So it's not something you need to be doing half of the time. If you do it in if I do it in 15 out of 150 leagues, I'm doing it way more often than the field. I'm just looking for my way to give myself outs, to give myself unique combinations. It's hard to do it through ownership when 90% of the guys are drafted in every league. So how can I do it? I could do it through unique roster construction. So is it going to be the most plus EV way to get through the first round of the tournament to get to the playoffs? No, but if I can get a couple of those teams through the playoffs and they can peak, then it's going to give me some unique outs.
Okay, so it's about differentiation. Yeah. It's about filling out your portfolio, and it's about letting it come to you. You're in a draft, and you're like, well, I ended up with 2 unbelievably good wide receivers, and my best tight end is available for me in the third round.
Absolutely.
I guess this is a zero running back.
Sometimes it just happens. Yep.
Well, and just to be clear, there's nobody out there that's like, I'm doing all no running back or zero running back.
Yeah, I think there's some guys that are going pretty hard on it.
But,
that's a good question.
Somebody could go 80% of their lineups are zero running back. You say.
Well, this is a perfect segue question.
Fucking unique stuff.
What was your percentage the last handful of years, and are you inclined to have a greater percentage of your portfolio this year with the bigger schedule and the kind of the more chaos? Seems plausible, frankly.
I've always been in that well, not always been. I mean, the best ball tournaments are very young. In my redraft leagues, I've always just loved it. Just one, because I just love making my league mates just irritated and angry, and then I just win the league anyway, so it's funny. But I think last year I was probably in that 5-10% range. This year I'm probably more inclined to do it a little bit more because it had such bad results last year. It just completely crapped the bed. And one of the reasons it crapped the bed is because people just weren't drafting enough running backs. People were going zero RB and then only drafting 5 running backs. We saw when you got to 6 or 7 running backs, the success of it started increasing. Now, we only have 2 years of data on Best Ball Mania. It could be very slippery slope to rely on that data as gospel. But we see these ebbs and flows with trends, whether it be in DFS or fantasy, that people are just so quick to write off the thing that didn't work last year. Another one of those things is the hyper fragile 4 running back builds. In the first Best Ball Mania tournament, Justin Herzig, who won, was a huge proponent, and Mike Leone as well, of the 4 running back builds, getting 2 or 3 running backs early and only sticking to 4. That did pretty poorly last year, but we know it can work. So I think noticing those trends and understanding that the field is probably going to be a little bit colder on them than they should be is a good spot to take advantage of.
I'm fine with it too. I mean, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, and it was just maybe a casual observation because we have the draft in the same garage every year, where when we get there, they'll put up the draft board from the year before so we can have a little chuckle. And you looked, and there was one year, it's 5 out of the first 6 picks got seriously injured because it started as usual. It was just a normal standard league, and you ended up with a lot of running backs early, and none of those guys are younger. I guess Jonathan Taylor isn't old, but looking down the list of if you look at the running backs that have moved to the top of the list, McCaffrey, Eckler, Henry, Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, Aaron Saquon. I mean, those guys have been injured before as running backs will. And you end up with one chaos year where 3 or 4 of these top running backs miss considerable time, and those zero running back builds just have to do well, right?
And it goes back to us being really bad at predicting the future and giving ourselves some of these outs and taking stands, right? If if you are, if a year like that does happen, and you're one of the few people that, even if you don't think it's optimal strategy, but you're one of the few people that decided I'm going to like build for this potential chaos, like you're gonna hit, right? Like the thing about things like DFS tournaments and now best ball tournaments is I especially people that play redraft, I think people have a very gross misunderstanding of how little projection it is in terms of like that understanding the median projections. Like we could come up with some pretty damn good median projections, but in DFS, it's way more important. I think I would argue that ownership projections are immensely more important than a median point projection. And if you can exploit those and understand what the field's going to do and be different, you don't need to win every single week in DFS. In NFL, 1 week could pay for your whole season if you're playing these large field tournaments. So understanding the field, understanding ownership percentages, understanding these trends is arguably going to be more important than your season-long projection on a player.
That checks out entirely.
Yeah.
I feel like you got to go back to like Adrian Peterson or LaDainian Tomlinson to have like the 1.01 guy was actually worth it. But does that, I mean, in general, if you're picking at the top of the draft, are you beholden a bit to the consensus there? Because I imagine like there's only upside. There's only so much upside at a guy who is expected to be at the top going at the top, right?
Yeah, I've had some discussions with dudes that are pretty damn good at fantasy and best ball that don't necessarily agree with me on this one. I go back to what I talked about, the difference between drafting in the summer and then when I get to August. I would say for now I'm kind of letting the draft fall to me in the first round or two unless I really don't like a guy. But so I can get a fair amount of exposure. Like these guys are going in the first round for usually pretty damn good reasons, right? Like all of them probably have league-winning upside. So I don't want to just be like fading Jonathan Taylor all the time. That just doesn't seem like a good strategy. So for the most part, for now, I'm kind of letting the first round come to me, let that kind of determine my build. And then again, when I get to August, September, I'll start taking some really hard stands on these guys and deciding who I want to be over or underexposed to. And I say I'm way more likely right now to be like fading guys and taking huge stands on these guys. Like use someone like Jamar Chase, for example. I love Jamar Chase. I love Justin Jefferson. I'm not taking them at 1.01 or 1.02 just to do it because I'm going to have enough picks at 5 or 6 to get them. Go back to like the Devontae Adams. If I don't like him, I'm going to take him when he falls. But, guys I like, I'm going to get my exposures to them in the first round. And then,
it's almost like good chalk in DFS. Like,
exactly.
If you draw 101,
exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. You can't be like, all right, I'm going to get real squirrely. Like you have to just say, well, I drew the first pick. I have to take, one of these, probably one of two running backs here, and just deal with it and realize like if I enter enough of these, I'm going to get enough 5s and 6s to take my stud wide receivers. I'll get my exposure at the top. And like you said, even though we're bad at predicting, I think we're pretty decent at predicting who's the most likely, 5 or 6 best running backs and receivers. Like, it's decent outside of, if people say, well, he didn't even finish top 12, well, he got injured. Like, usually if these guys don't finish, somewhere close to their range, it's because of a big injury. And that shit is completely unpredictable.
Let me compound that specifically. So there are certainly some players, and age matters. Injury history matters, but there are some players who only have tail risk and don't have upside. Like their role and their relationship with their veteran quarterback is in stone. That you are going to get this many targets per game, and if you catch the ball thrown to you, you're going to produce this.
Are you making a case for heavy Wentz exposure?
No, no. But certainly some players only have downside risk and others have uncertainty to the upside. Do you have a methodology either quantitatively or qualitatively to capture the high upside risk guys and avoid the guys that only have tail risk?
Yeah, I think the downside guys, a lot of it is age related. I think or steady declines in efficiency is something we rarely see bounce back. Like someone that comes to mind right now is Ezekiel Elliott. Like even though he's being drafted down at, I don't know, in the 40s or 50s, like does Ezekiel Elliott have he's being drafted at, he's being drafted at 38. It's not even that low. Does he have the overall running back one in his range of outcomes? Like probably not. Whereas when I'm looking for guys with the upside, I think it is, I kind of draft offenses more so than players. So if I could pinpoint these offenses that are trending up, Bills were the perfect example a couple years ago. Buying the pieces of those at cost or even better below cost, I think you're going to maximize your opportunities. If you were buying Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs a couple years ago because you projected that offense to be better, you won a lot of leagues. Eagles are one of those teams for me this year, and especially when they're pretty affordable, like those offenses trending up with a lot of affordable ADPs. Those you strike a lot of gold there.
I love that. So then let's talk about one other type of build and stack, and that is you mentioned offenses with upside.
Yep.
The correlation, I'm assuming, is quarterback receiver.
Yeah.
I'm assuming there's a small negative correlation to running back receiver and running back quarterback. Is that right?
Yeah. If we look at league-wide trends,
or even tight end wide out. I wonder.
If we look at league-wide trends, of league-wide basis, the running game and the pass game are going to be negative correlated. That's very intuitive. If we look at something like DFS, you see a lot of stacks with whether it be quarterback with a running back and a receiver, or even more popular, just like a running back with his own wide receiver. Because on that weekly level, when an offense blows up, if they score 6 or 7 touchdowns in a week, like both parts of the offense are probably getting theirs, right? What we've seen on the season-long best ball level is that two things have been very detrimental to stacking options. One, going back to your point about if we're reaching, do you reach for players you like? If you're reaching for teams you like, if you're going out of your way ahead of ADP to combine any players from offense, we just haven't seen a lot of success with it. So if you're drafting Steph Diggs 3 spots ahead of ADP and Josh Allen 8 spots ahead of ADP, just have the Bill stack, that hasn't been great. You don't have to avoid the early round stacks, but like let them come to you. What we have seen work a lot is these ancillary pieces to offenses. So surprisingly, a quarterback with a running back 2 and a wide receiver 3 or 4 have had huge successes in these tournaments, which kind of makes sense because, again, we think about what we're dealing with on this tournament. We're not working in a traditional redraft league where we can manage our teams or we even have to pick who is starting. But these ancillary players where we get bad at predicting the deep end of the depth chart, the running back 2 versus running back 3 or the wide receiver 3 versus the wide receiver 4. If you stack those guys on an offense that goes bonkers and they start to succeed later in the year, like those best ball teams are going to do better, right? And then Andy, to answer your point, a lot of the correlations that we've seen have been like a secondary running back with a tight end. Like these, the way you could think about it is these players that need their offenses to go off to have big seasons. They're like Josh Allen's going to bring along Isaiah McKenzie with them, where Stephon Diggs is just a monster. Stephon Diggs is going to ball no matter what, right? But if the Bills have a crazy season, that 3rd and 4th receiver, that's when they're going to have their big season. So that's why these cheaper ancillary guys tend to get dragged up by a really good offense, where the guys that are ballers on volume, like they don't necessarily need to be in the best offenses. They don't need their quarterback to bring them up. They're going to get there. So the ancillary players in best ball have been super interesting, and it's been really successful, like waiting to stack towards the second half of the draft.
I love this part too, and especially it's a matter of draft capital spent. Mm-hmm. If you find someone who is a wide receiver 3 on what is supposed to be a league average offense, and he turns out to be, closer to like a 2A, where he's getting as many targets as the second guy Maybe he gets a little more slot work than he was supposed to. He's getting, 40% more targets than we thought early in the season. And also that offense just starts clicking. Like his ADP was probably 50 spots low.
Yeah, the return on that is just like exponentially higher, right? Like if your second round guy hits second round value, cool, he paid off. If
like you said,
if your 10th round
Diggs
guy is giving you second round value,
yeah, like the way that Diggs has, like Drew talked about the long tail to the bad, like Diggs' tail hits his head on the ceiling pretty quick. Like if he has the best season ever, if he has the best season ever for a wide receiver, it's not as much upside as you could get from a wide receiver 3 that got drafted, like 160 or wherever you want to have him. Just there's so much more room for upside based on the draft capital spent. Yeah, when you draft those guys high, you're expecting them to play well more often than not.
Yep, exactly.
So how much do you factor in sort of the market rating of team offense and defense coming into the season? And do you think that's adequately reflected in ADP in general? Like, I guess good example is like there's two ways you go about production. One is you have a great offense. The other is you have a really good offense and a shit defense, right?
Yeah. I think the offenses that we think are nowhere going to be elite, that's always kind of going to be priced into it. And then there's just always going to be one or two offenses that just catch steam for whatever reason, because shows like this and me talking about the Eagles too much or something like that. As far as like what carries over from one year to the next, or if you're talking about like the defensive matchups, I don't know how much people are thinking about that defensive side of things. It might be an interesting way to think about it. As far as the stickiness of it from year to year, how defenses perform against positions, which we care about for fantasy, is like super unpredictable, except for like the absolute extremes. Like the absolute best teams, say against quarterbacks, are going to stay the best. Like those secondaries are going to stay good. The absolute worst teams are usually going to stay pretty bad. But in the middle, from teams that are ranked 27th against the pass will jump up to being ranked 6th or 7th against the pass all the time. I think it's probably not something we're super good at predicting. If anything, I think one thing that has at least a little bit of actionable predictive nature to it is just looking at something as simple as win totals, futures. The following teams with higher win totals, that's usually going to be better game script, better scoring conditions. Like even if those offenses aren't great, teams that win more are just going to have more favorable team opportunities, scoring opportunities. A lot of times that is going to pertain to maybe the running back a little bit more than the other positions, but quarterbacks benefit from good game script too.
Okay. How much does end of season matter when you're putting together a roster?
Well, I've seen some tweets about this, Drew.
This has been a very common joke that I don't get. About week 16, week 17.
Yeah, I mean,
Davis Maddock had a tweet I did not understand.
I mean, that's his whole. That's been his whole Twitter. That's been David. Well, I haven't understand Davis Maddock's Twitter since 2013, so don't feel bad.
To be fair, yes.
Is it sarcastic, or like are you literally avoiding teams that are like outdoors in cold weather in
no, we're not going that far. Okay. That is sarcastic. I think. Okay. Maybe not. But I mean, as far as thinking about week 17 specifically and the playoffs, I mean, again, go back to how this tournament is set up. $3 million out of the $10 million is being awarded to two guys in week 17. 30% of the prize pool is going to two guys, two guys in week 17. So we want to mostly be optimizing for that week because that's what we're playing for. So the way I've been thinking about it is, again, those late rounds, like if we're stacking our teams, our offenses, our Bills, our Eagles, or whatever, like they're going to be playing together on week 17 anyway. But understanding who those teams are playing against, and kind of making some late round decisions on building out those game stacks. Obviously, there are going to be ones that we like more than the other ones, but no, optimizing for week 17, I think with such a top heavy prize pool, I think you kind of have to. Again, I don't think you should be forcing it in the first 2 rounds. When it falls naturally with some studs, that is great. But those last few rounds have been that's kind of how I've been making my, last 4 or 5 picks of every draft. I'm at least thinking about week 17.
Andy, you're
Well,
actually. Let me. Do you have the look ahead totals for week 17? Do you already know what the highest total on the board is going to be?
We had that up Superbook.
I've only seen the Superbook lines. I haven't seen their totals.
I'm not sure if they had totals up.
There were game totals up on Vegas Insider last week, and then they most of them were down like a day later. So I don't know what's up with that.
Buffalo Cincy is going to be a massive number.
I was going to say we could kind of guess, but
yeah, I mean, I could tell you which ones
know.
I've been targeting heavily is Buffalo Cincy, KC Denver, Green Bay Minnesota, a sneaky one that I've just I think it's probably more of just like ADP value. Detroit Chicago, Philly New Orleans.
How about Atlanta Arizona? That's kind of sneaky.
I think
indoors.
I think that makes.
Both quarterbacks will be hurt by then.
Atlanta, Arizona makes sense for some. I have a ton of Kyle Pitts, so I just keep automatically doing that. If you're trying to get super funky with it and you're trying to win $2 million, I have thrown in some Desmond Ridder with my Kyle Pitts.
Yeah,
because there's a pretty decent chance he's playing by then.
Yep. Chargers, Rams,
beautiful. Yep.
San Francisco versus the Raiders.
I wrote that one up the day the schedule came out, and now I keep just not drafting it.
Interesting.
That one actually has a total up at one place.
I tell you, so which ones will not have a lot of points?
What do you think
Pittsburgh,
that total
Baltimore.
is?
That total might be 41.5, 42.
Yep.
Which one were you asking? San Francisco.
Niners total.
It's in Vegas, so it's probably going to be 49.50.
It's only 47.5 up at Caesars. You were right. The Chargers is on the other side of 50 already.
Yeah.
Which fair. Those are the only 2 I can find lines for right now.
Interesting.
Seems low. Should we bet a week 17 game right now?
No, I don't think so.
I might do it anyway.
Plenty of time for that.
I talked a big game about actually doing a draft today, and I quickly backpedaled because shit, I know so little about this. I don't even want to throw the $5 away now. I got to read the Bible thing that you wrote.
It's a doozy. It's a doozy.
Is it long?
It's a 7-part series, and they're each a couple thousand words.
Can we give away who your favorite tight end is to stack with the early tight end strategy? Or
it's Kyle Pitts.
Kyle Pitts. Okay.
Yeah, it's Kyle Pitts.
Yeah,
he's a freak.
Seems like somebody who's going to win somebody $1 million this year.
That's interesting too. The Ritter thing is interesting too. I suppose I'm gonna have to take a bunch of the. What kind of exposures do you think you'll be seeing on, Ritter? Maybe even Willis. I know that he's not like.
I'll be honest with you.
There could be an injury there.
Buda Baker's a fine player. That Cardinals secondary sucks.
Yeah.
Pitts is gonna win somebody $1 million week 17.
I could see Ritter getting popular in August, or not. I would say popular, but I could see it getting to a point where he's being drafted before the last round, which would make him, going in 70 or 80% of leagues. But right now he's going undrafted. So I mean,
fine.
I'm fine with that.
Okay. Here's an off the cuff one that's going to be tough. Do you have 1 or 2 positional battles that you are refreshing every time? You're well, let's look at some camp reports or some mini camp reports, or when camp gets here, 1 or 2 positional battles that you're going to be refreshing nonstop.
Yeah, it was going to be the Chiefs backfield until they re-signed McKinnon, and now I think that's just going to be a shit show. Definitely the Broncos pass catchers. I mean, people are going to be talking about Javonte and Melvin a lot, but I don't think there's not going to be clarity on that. I think most likely they kind of start to split and Javonte pulls away. But if we can figure out who Russ likes between Cortland and Jerry Jeudy, I think that's going to be a fantastic nugget to figure out. I think. Bills running backs. James Cook versus Devin Singletary. Yeah. That's a huge one for me. Yeah.
So is there a player that you've kind of made a bet on in the closing rounds of drafts that you're if you wake up in August and they're he's got RB1 or wide receiver 2, you're just gonna fist pump Antonio Banderas. Yes.
Yeah, the two guys I've been going really hard on are Mecole Hardman and Isaiah McKenzie.
Okay.
Just because you're getting cheap pass catchers and tied to two of the best quarterbacks in the league, and I don't even the Mecole thing. I don't even necessarily if I was John Paulson and I was making season-long projections, I would probably project it out like ADP or maybe flip-flop Sky and MVS. But if I'm getting there's 4 wide receivers on the Chiefs. They're all going within 50 picks of each other. It's super ambiguous. And I'm getting the cheapest one, who's the only one that has actually seen a target from Patrick Mahomes in his career. So, if I'm getting him in the 12th or 13th round, when I'm already stacking Denver, Kansas City a ton, I love that. And then Isaiah McKenzie, that's just an absolute dart throw. If somehow something happens to Diggs or Gabe Davis isn't who everybody thinks Gabe Davis is going to be, even though I do love Gabe, there's a very big non-zero chance that he isn't
he has a wide distribution of results.
He's going wide receiver 24 right now.
So I like Isaiah McKenzie. I think a lot. I think he's a really good bet.
And then in regards to, again, back to the beginning, where to play, is Underdog the only one that has big tournaments like this?
No, man. No, not at all.
I just went to Yahoo and it's do you want to play in this $5 10-man league? No.
Yeah, I mean, if you're somebody that doesn't want to play in these tournaments, that wants to,
I want more. I want different.
No, I know, but if somebody wants to, invest $1,000 and get a nice little $400 or $500 Christmas bonus, go play at Yahoo. But FFPC has some really nice tournaments. They have their Best Ball Mania tournament. FFPC is tight end premium, so that makes it a nice little wrinkle. And the tournament is 9,800 people, I think. So you don't have to be going out of your way to be doing these crazy unique things in the Best Ball Mania tournament. There's some smaller tournaments like the Puppy on Underdog. There's Drafters, which is a full PPR site. Their unique wrinkle is it's just highest score for the season. So it's not it doesn't get broken down into these 4 playoff weeks like they do on Underdog and FFPC. So you can you if you don't want to have to be thinking about these week 17 optimization type things, Drafters has a really great tournament. I know I'm forgetting one.
I have all these tabs open now just so I remember them later and I don't have to listen to my
own. DraftKings. Yeah. DraftKings has a ton of tournaments, obviously. DraftKings
forget about little company called DraftKings.
Yeah, that small one. DraftKings has a ton
how are you, let's say let's just say it's $10,000 worth of best ball money. How are you allocating it site wise?
I'll probably split it somewhat evenly between DK and Underdog. FFPC I just
mostly big tournaments.
Yeah. I don't I'll play some smaller stuff, but my bread and butter is DFS, so this is like playing a qualifier for me. I'm playing best ball like qualifiers at this point.
Trying to win tickets.
Yeah. I'll play some FFPC, but tight end premium is just never suited my eye, so to speak, for whatever reason. So I don't play a ton of FFPC, although they do have a pretty good product.
They run a playoff league, right?
They run all kinds of stuff. Yeah,
is that where the one? Yep. That's the one with the big playoff.
Yeah, that's the one where you got to pick one player from each team. Yeah, right. Yep. You get the cumulative playoff.
I used to be in a weird league like that, and it was super fun. And I had the nuts if Favre didn't throw across his body. So that was in 2000. I was playing best ball in 2009, guys.
Nice.
We can't let you leave without answering the most important off-season question. Are you too anon or are you too go to the bench? Too anon. He's actually good, or the Dolphins' offense is going to be a disaster?
Dude, I haven't been drafting a lot of Dolphins.
You danced around it, but not really.
Yeah, I don't like the Dolphins. I don't think it's gonna happen.
Just the one social media post where it's the bomb. That was the bomb, and it looks like he's sitting there waiting to catch a punt.
It looked like. Do you remember the Little Giants? The movie The Little Giant. It looked like when the toilet paper was spinning in the air to Hot Hands. That's what that looked like.
Who was the? What was the? Oh, Kelly would know this. Was it Miss? And I don't watch wrestling, but Mr. Perfect, I think maybe, who threw the football to himself. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go find that clip. It was like this clip from like the '90s where he threw a touchdown pass to himself. It went a long way. That's awesome. Too. So, all right, I think I'm still waiting to evaluate a lot of stuff. It is still June, but if I were drafting right now, I probably wouldn't have much to.
I don't think
there's, and maybe there's something to said. And you have to do this, and something again I've learned from DFS. Sometimes you have to take some guys you don't like. Yeah. If you're making a big, like, I've max entered some, and again when I max enter, it's like, hey, I'm max entering this $5 tournament this weekend, because that's a lot of lineups, and that makes me nervous if I put too much money into shit where I'm not very good at it. But when
it's a pretty good strategy. Don't invest a lot of money in shit you're not good at.
Yeah, I enjoy the 150 lineup look. Yeah, especially and I love the
at the beginning. At the beginning, it's really fun.
And I love the swings of like, oh my god, I'm winning all the money, and then if you're not winning all the money anymore, then you just don't pay attention the rest of the weekend. You're like, I bet too. I'm gonna track my bets instead. Okay. But the same kind of thing goes where even in that, it's like, my player pool has to have a few guys that are, I don't like this guy. I don't think he's gonna play well here. I don't think he fits. But Christ, he's underowned. Like, his percentage is just way too low, and you have to throw him in there. So that might be the case with some of these guys that I think stink. If they're getting underdrafted, I might have to add them to my. I don't know. Again, I don't know how many I'm going to add. And my last thing too is, win Superflex rankings.
We got Superflex rankings.
Is that a thing? Okay, I'm not very good at finding it.
Oh yeah. I'll shoot you a link.
Yeah, you may need to help me. I just found regular rankings. Maybe I'm doing it wrong.
No, they're in our custom ranking system, but I'll shoot you the link over there.
All right, good. I need that because, again, I'm mostly just because I don't know what I'm doing yet. I'm mostly gonna enter the $5 tournament, go to the 25. When you mentioned, it's like $37.50 to max the big one.
Yeah,
probably not happening for me.
Can you explain why, in like the top 10 wide receivers, why is Deebo Samuel the biggest riser?
I cannot explain that. No.
Would you rather? I mean, he just flipped Hill now. I mean, at this point, are you buying? If Hill's cold, Samuel's hot. Does any of this make sense?
I haven't really been on receiver in that area at all, to be honest with you. I think maybe the only thing I could imagine is that people are just getting more confident that it is going to be Trey Lance. I heard some Jimmy Garoppolo to Cleveland discussions already, so maybe that could be what's moving it.
That would be wild.
Yeah, could there be a full year suspension? Not to get into that whole thing again, but man, now they're suing the Texans. Yeah, this is just gonna get murkier and murkier. And it's already pretty fucking murky.
Yeah.
TJ, tell people where people can find all your stuff.
Yeah, man, everything is available at 4for4.com. As I mentioned, if you are just kind of dabbling in best ball, you can, and the Best Ball Mania tournament specifically, you can check out the Best Ball Mania Bible. It's a 7-piece series that I wrote that just goes from the most foundational things in best ball to how to be unique in week 17 in the Best Ball Mania tournament. And a lot of those lessons are super applicable to any underdog or best ball league you're going to be playing. It's based off of our underdog tools at 4for4, and we have a complete suite of best ball content and tools. So even if you don't plan on playing Best Ball Mania specifically, everything that you need to get ready for any best ball league is available at 4for4. All of our season-long projections, rankings, content is also up there. And if you are interested in dabbling outside of the football realm, I've been going pretty hard in the Formula One DFS street. So check out the 4for Formula One podcast. We got a race this week, so we'll have all of that content up Saturday after qualifying.
Ooh, well, that's gonna be good.
Did they fix again, we were going to close the show, but now I have questions. Did they fix F1 DFS yet? That first
really.
week,
No.
I was.
It's better than week 1, but they salaries are not ideal, but it's been decent.
Yeah, week 1 we had just some guys in the RAS chat put it together, and I think there were 7 people that entered just a fun league that someone put together, and I think we had 3 duplicates.
Yeah,
and then 2 other ones where the top 2 guys were just flipped.
Week 1 was a disaster. Week 1 was a disaster. It's gotten a little better. It's a nice sweat because you can't build until after qualifying, so you have less than 24 hours to get ready, and it's a 90-minute race. So it's a pretty quick sweat. Obviously, sometimes the race is at 5 a.m, but it is what it is.
Yeah, then you can just sleep in, forget about it, see what happened when you wake up.
Yep.
Watch it over again. So cool. Appreciate you hopping on. I feel a lot more educated. I feel like
big time.
I'm gonna have to read the Bible series here and figure out a little more before I get into it. But thanks for shooting me those rankings over.
Oh, of course.
I'm a Superflex guy now. No big deal.
There it is.
I don't know what that means. Is that just 2 quarterbacks?
Yep.
Okay. That I know.
Essentially.
Why is Jameis Winston QB19? Shouldn't he be here? Is that crazy?
I think that's pretty fair.
It's pretty fair.
Yeah.
I have my rankings.
Okay. Well, let's call it a show. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate you.
You just got cut off by the music?
It's all right. Monday.
Well, I mean, you did tell him to call the show.
Yeah.
You can't complain when he cuts you off.
It's all good.
I feel like I can do this in the background.
You can do 150 of these, you think?
We'll see. I mean, how many days until NFL starts?